This podcast is part of the Dark Myths Collective. Visit darkmyths.org to discover more shows like this one. The darkness awaits.
This is a podcast on the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.
There's more mischief, mayhem, and nefarious goings-on in the city of brotherly love than Billy Penn could have ever imagined. We've got it all here on the Twisted Philly podcast. True crime, haunted history, the coolest and creepiest places to visit. Welcome to Twisted Philly.
Hey Twisters, what up? Welcome back to another episode of Twisted Philly. I'm your host, Dina Marie. Thank you so much for all the feedback about the Eastern State Penitentiary episode. So many of you have reached out on Facebook or Twitter to tell me how much you enjoyed it. A few of you mentioned you learned something new, which is really cool. And some of you told me you or your family will be visiting soon. I hope you let me know if you had a great time, because I'm sure you will. The second episode in the Twisted Prison series is about Moyamensing Prison, and that's on Patreon. Moyamensing may not have as magnanimous a history as Eastern State, but it is an architectural marvel, and it too had a few infamous residents, including the nefarious H.H. Holmes. I hope you'll consider tuning into Part 2 on Patreon. Part 3 in Twisted Prisons will be Penhurst Asylum, and I'm switching that episode with another one today because I may have a special guest joining me, and I want to accommodate her recording schedule. We've got a few what-ups to get to right off the bat. What up to Linger Fan, the latest 5-star reviewer, who gave up listening to the radio at work to listen to Twisted Philly. That's amazing, and I feel like Wayne and Garth.
I'm not worthy! I'm not worthy!
Thank you so much. What up to our latest Patreon supporters, Diane, Emily, Kilogram, and the Podcast We Listen To podcast. For our $5 Patreon supporters, September rewards are a little late because I've been on the road the last 3 or 4 weeks straight for work, but they went out today. And congratulations to our September Patreon t-shirt winner, Amanda W. If you want to find out more about Patreon rewards and swag, go to www.patreon.com and search on Twisted Philly. So, what are we talking about today? Well, it's October. It's almost Halloween, and I love horror movies. Two weeks ago, I had the opportunity to record with my dear friend Nick from the Epic Film Guys podcast and help kick off their Halloween horror series for the month of October. Nick let me pick the movies we discussed, so I went with a classic horror film, American Werewolf in London, and a newer indie film from 2016, I Am Not a Serial Killer, which I really enjoyed, and Nick was basically traumatized by that movie. One thing that struck me so much about American Werewolf in London is that it was filmed entirely on location. They weren't traipsing through the fields and hills in the US when David and Jack were backpacking at the beginning of the movie. They were truly on the moors of England. And it got me thinking about horror movies made right here in Pennsylvania. So that's the topic for today's episode. Horror in Twisted Philly. This is also a huge homage to my Podfix brothers and sister, who are the best of the best in movie podcast hosts. They've been a huge help to me over the last year, and I don't think I do movies quite as well as they do, but I'm going to give it my best. I watch horror movies all year long, but in October, it's like I overdose on horror. Classic films like the movies from the 40s and 50s, cheesy 80s horror movies, great 80s horror movies, new horror, indie horror, schlock horror. The only thing I don't like is torture horror. I much prefer monsters and ghosts and creatures. Shit, you guys might remember the episode about my Christmas tradition of watching holiday horror movies. Well, this will be more traditional horror, but every movie I'm going to talk about was filmed in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania. Now, let me say out of the gate, I'm not going to include M. Night Shyamalan movies. I love Shyamalan movies, almost every single one of them, except for the complete piece of shit The Happening. As far as I'm concerned, that movie doesn't even exist. Except for Betty Buckley's role, because she was crazy in that movie. All M. Night Shyamalan movies are filmed in Philly and suburban Philadelphia, so that would basically be an entire episode dedicated to one filmmaker. And I want a variety of movies and locations so you get a sense of just how many other horror films were made in the Keystone State. And as you might imagine, some of these are my absolute most favorite horror movies. One of my favorite classic horror films, a film I grew up watching even as a child, which probably caused serious issues with my psyche, is the 1958 horror film The Blob.
Dave! Doc Hallen's been killed.
Doc Hallen, what happened?
It's over at his place. You gotta come now.
Oh, wait a minute, Steve. Tell us what happened.
Well, I'm trying to tell you. Now, this thing had killed the doc.
But what was it?
Stop with it, kid. But it's kind of like a mass that keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Every one of you watching this screen, look out. Because soon, very soon, the most horrifying monster menace ever conceived will be oozing into this theater. Two teenagers see it first, like a falling star from outer space.
Boy, that was close. Come on, I want to see if I can find it.
An old man finds it, touches it, and this is the shocking result. From then on, there's no stopping the blob as it spreads from town to town. It's indestructible. It's indescribable. Nothing can stop it.
This town is in danger.
How can it be stopped? Mob hysteria sweeps one city. Before long, the nation, and then the world could fall before the blood-curdling threat of the Blob.
Starring Steve McQueen and a cast of exciting young people.
So a relative unknown young actor named Steve McQueen played the lead role of Steve Andrews. McQueen was 28 years old, playing the role of a high school kid, and he did not look like a high school kid. But he's certainly not the only almost 30-year-old to ever play a teenager. The Blob is the story of an alien life force that hitchhikes on a meteorite that lands in suburban Philly and grows, and grows, and grows. It is a disgusting, gelatinous mass that gets bigger with everything it eats, humans or inanimate objects. What's even stranger than the actual Blob is how the movie was made. It started with a man named Jack Harris. Now, Jack was a film distributor from Pennsylvania who was sick and tired of shilling everyone else's movies, and he wanted to make one of his own. He didn't have much money to get the project off the ground, so he convinced a local movie studio to back his film. The studio was called Valley Forge Studio, which is about a mile from where I live, as in Valley Forge Park, where some of the battles of the Revolutionary War were fought. Valley Forge Studios made a particular type of film, and it wasn't horror. They made religious films, Christian movies, spreading the word of God. Jack Harris worked his magic on Valley Forge Studio by telling them that if they worked with him to make a movie that more people would see, then they would have more money to fund their Christian films. A man named Irvine Milgate conceived the original idea of the Blob. Irvin Yeworth, who worked for Valley Forge Films and had previously only made religious movies, directed the Blob. He made 2 more B-horror movies after the Blob and then returned to his religious roots and spent the rest of his career making movies with televangelist Billy Graham. Jack Harris wanted to make a monster movie, and he wanted it to be totally different, something that didn't in any way involve a man wearing a costume. He wanted his film to stand out among other horror movies with, in his words, some kind of form that's never been done before. And that's exactly what he did, because The Blob, the actual disgusting mass, is awesome. And it was totally different than any other B horror movie out in the 50s. Considering when it was made, the special effects are really first rate. The movie took only 31 days to film, but it took 9 months to edit and add in the effects of the Blob. Almost all of the filming locations are between 10 to 30 minutes from where I live, so they're all in suburban Philadelphia. The Downingtown Diner, other scenes were shot in towns like Chester Springs and Valley Forge, and the best scene in the entire movie is when the Blob takes over a movie theater, and that's the Colonial Theater in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, which is less than 10 minutes from where I am. The Colonial Theater is fantastic. It's an old theater that's been maintained. It shows current films as well as classic movies. They have special programs like Cult Night and Fright Night, and they also have sensory-friendly screenings. The theater turns down the sound, leaves up the lights, and the no-talking rule is not enforced. Every year, Colonial Theater also hosts an event called Blob Fest. It's an annual celebration of the movie The Blob, part of which was filmed right there at the theater. Next year's Blob Fest is July 13th through 15th, and you can find out more about the event on their Facebook page at Blobfest. The funniest thing to me about the Colonial Theater in The Blob is a sign that hung up outside of the theater that read, "Healthfully air-conditioned." It's so 50s, and I love it. I love the gee whiz style of the movie and the ear-splitting screams as crowds of people flee the theater. I love that the theater marquee in the movie has a Bela Lugosi film advertised on it. Steve McQueen spends pretty much the entire movie running around town warning people about the Blob, and finally, well, maybe I shouldn't give away the ending because I would love for you to watch it. Watch it for the Downingtown Diner, the Colonial Theater, the scares, and the laughs. Yes, it was obviously made in 1958, so if I hear one person say it doesn't hold up, I'm going to throat punch a motherfucker because it's okay to watch movies that are 60 years old and enjoy them for that campy nostalgia. Blobfest next year should be fantastic because it's the 60th anniversary of the movie. Maybe I'll cosplay some sort of a blob costume.
The Blob, starring Steve McQueen and a cast of exciting young people.
Pennsylvania is such a great place to film movies that even my favorite author came to our great state to film Creepshow.
Coming soon. Jolting tales of horror. Creepshow. From the author of Carrie, The Shining, and Cujo. And the creator of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. You'll scream at ghastly ghouls. Cringe at weird kids. And shiver at the doings of evil doctors. Creepshow will grab you, grow on you, and give you the creeps.
No, this is going to be an entirely new experience.
Creepshow, the most fun you'll ever have being scared.
Yep. Stephen King's screenwriting debut was the 1982 movie Creepshow, directed by none other than the master of horror himself, George Romero. King doesn't just make a cameo in Creepshow. He actually stars in one of 5 vignettes featured in the film. 2 of the 5 stories are adaptations from King's own short stories, Weeds and The Crate. The Crate is one of my favorites of all of King's shorts. Creepshow is an homage to horror comics from the 50s. When you watch the film, each vignette features animated comic intros and outros, and the action of each story, well, the characters feel like a live comic book. Almost the entire film was shot in and around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and really, that's due to George Romero, who made most of his films outside of Pittsburgh. Romero wasn't a Pennsylvania son. He was actually born in the Bronx. He attended Carnegie Mellon University, and that's probably where he developed his love for lush forests and the rolling green hills of Pennsylvania. Most of Creepshow was shot in an abandoned girls' school in Greenburgh that's about 30 miles outside of Pittsburgh. Romero had the school converted into a temporary film studio, but there were plenty of location shots too. The Crate, which is the story of a professor who finds a crate hidden beneath the basement stairs at his university with some sort of devilish creature contained therein, was filmed at Carnegie Mellon University. And scenes were even filmed in Romero's own backyard at his home in Shadyside, which is in Pittsburgh's East End. Another segment of the film, Something to Tide You Over, is about a woman who has an affair and her husband who gets his revenge, but that was filmed in New Jersey. But that's close enough to be Pennsylvania, so it's okay. It counts. Besides The Crate, my other favorite segment in Creepshow is They're Creeping Up on You, starring E.G. Marshall, who appeared in over 60 movies and TV shows throughout his career. If his name isn't familiar to you, you might recognize him as Old Uncle Art in Christmas Vacation. They're Creeping Up on You is a futuristic story of a man who is a neat freak. He lives in an apartment that seems as if it's been hermetically sealed. Suddenly, a cockroach appears. Then another. Then a few more. And, well, you can guess where this is going, and it's creepy as fuck. Some bugs don't bother me, and while I can't say I've ever seen a cockroach in real life, like the sort that they show in movies, the idea of bugs crawling all over me is disgusting. Creepshow is a fantastic horror fantasy. It's cheesy and scary and campy and funny, and I absolutely love it. It is an annual rewatch for me every October, and it is a beautiful view into the western part of our state. Speaking of George Romero, I don't care about fancy CGI horror effects. When it comes to fear and horror, you have to go back to the classics, or at least I do. And George Romero truly was a master of classic horror. Anything you see today that has any connection at all to the undead, TV shows like The Walking Dead, Z Nation, iZombie, and movies like 28 Days Later, World War Z, all of them owe a huge debt to George Romero. Now, I already mentioned George Romero isn't from Pennsylvania, but that is unfair of me to say. Just because he wasn't born here doesn't mean he isn't a Pennsylvania boy at heart, and he lived here for quite a long time. Romero went to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and his first major motion picture was filmed in Evans City, which is about 30 miles north of Pittsburgh in Butler County. Night of the Living Dead didn't start out as a tale of the dead rising from their graves in rural Pennsylvania. In the mid-'60s, George Romero was making commercials at Leighton Image. That was his film company based in Pittsburgh. Some of the greatest films and filmmakers of all time influenced Romero, and he wanted to make a feature film of his own. Along with his partners, writer John Russo and actor Rudy Ritchie, the first concept for Night of the Living Dead was actually alien teenagers invading Earth to party with human teens. But they had no budget, so creating any kind of alien would have been impossible. The story ideas went through multiple iterations until eventually George Romero landed on the concept of beings who eat flesh. And what was cheaper than flesh-eating aliens? Dead people.
Well, you used to really be scared here.
Johnny!
You're still afraid.
Stop it now, I mean it.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're acting like a child.
They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.
The opening scene of Night of the Living Dead was filmed in Evans Cemetery on Franklin Road. It's in the southern borough of Evans City. Producer Carl Hardman, who also played the role of Harry, said, "We knew that we could not raise enough money to shoot a film on par with the classic horror films with which we had all grown up. The best we could do was place our cast in a remote spot, then bring the horror to be visited on them in that spot." So I read a story about a nude zombie, or a ghoul as Romero referred to them. He never called them zombies. The production crew believed that some zombies would be naked. So when you think about people who are dead rising from the grave, becoming the undead, of course it makes sense that there would be dead people in a morgue who wouldn't have clothes on them. So Romero and crew set up a night scene to film one naked zombie. Well, the residents of Evans City, Pennsylvania caught wind of this and turned it into a night out. There were people setting up lawn chairs around the edge of the property where Romero and his crew were filming. At first I thought, what's the big deal? It's just a naked woman. And then I remembered this is 1967. And yeah, back then naked women were a very big deal. The house used for filming still stands today. It's on Washington Street in Evans City. Night of the Living Dead is a nightmare brought to life. The world is in a panic as the dead come alive, and they are hungry.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder. Medical authorities in Cumberland have concluded that in all cases, the killers are eating the flesh of the people they murder. Repeating this latest bulletin just received moments ago from Cumberland, Maryland, civil defense authorities have told newsmen that murder victims show evidence of having been partially devoured by their murderers.
The film is also about the human condition. It's a disparate group of people huddled for safety in a rural farmhouse as their veil of shelter and well-being is torn to shreds.
We may not enjoy living together, but dying together isn't going to solve anything.
I love movies that simply dive into plot and action from moment one, and Night of the Living Dead does just that. It starts out with brother and sister, Johnny and Barbara, visiting the grave of their father when the undead rising from their graves attack them. Johnny is killed, and Barbara, played by Judith O'Dea, runs to a nearby farmhouse where she meets Ben. Ben is the hero of the movie, and he's played by Dwayne Jones. Ben and Barbara realize they're not alone in this big old Pittsburgh farmhouse. There are two families hiding in the basement, one with a daughter who was bitten by a zombie. So you can guess what's going to happen inside that house, while all around them, outside, the undead are fighting their way in, even the naked zombie. The end of the movie is chilling. And it almost wasn't. Dwayne Jones, who plays Ben, convinced Romero to leave the ending as it is. And to find out how the movie ends, you're going to have to watch it. It is absolutely worth your time. Night of the Living Dead is the birth of a legacy. The Crazies, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Diary of the Dead. Plus, Romero has been at the helm of so many other movies, Stephen King's Monkey Shines and The Dark Half, and all of this was filmed in Pittsburgh. His 1977 movie Martin, which is the story of a young man who believes he's an 84-year-old vampire, that was filmed outside of Pittsburgh. Season of the Witch, another Romero film, which sort of sucked, but we all make mistakes. That one was filmed in Pittsburgh, too. Romero did so much for horror, so much for his fans, and so much for the state of Pennsylvania. Sadly, he passed away just a few months ago, which left me so blue. I've rewatched so many Romero movies since he passed, and Night of the Living Dead is another annual Halloween rewatch for me. There are some real shit horror movies filmed in Pennsylvania too, and there isn't much to say about them, because while I do sometimes enjoy cheesy, bad horror, I don't enjoy shitty horror. Okay, you're probably wondering what's the difference. Well, it's difficult to articulate. I know it when I see it. Cheesy bad horror is Evil Dead, which for some reason when I was a teenager, I swore that movie was filmed in Pennsylvania, and I was totally wrong. Evil Dead is so good, and parts of it are so bad, but that makes it so good. It was a student film on a student film budget, and it has actual scares, not merely jump scares, but true atmospheric fear and moments of terror mixed in with some of the worst special effects ever. That's cheesy bad. It's still scary and wonderful, which makes me love it. Then there are shitty horror movies filmed in Pennsylvania like Wicked Little Things and Biophage. Don't watch them. Just don't. Horror, yes. Filmed in PA, yes. Watchable, absolutely not. Imagine Nick Cage in Wicker Man. We're talking that bad. I have to talk about Devil, the 2010 film by John Dowdle, based on a story by M. Night Shyamalan.
This is not good. Where's elevator 6 in inspection mode?
Oh, come on, man.
What's happening?
Nothing. Just relax. What was that? You all right?
You're bleeding.
Oh, my God.
It feels like something bit me.
Does anybody have anything sharp on them? They might have cut her.
No.
You mind if we search your pockets?
Yes, I do mind. You mind if we search yours?
What was that?
Don't come near me, any of you.
Back away from each other now!
This movie scared the fuck out of me. No joke. I remember watching it when it first came out on demand, sitting on the floor next to my fireplace, thinking the fire would somehow keep me safe. I am not Catholic. I was raised Catholic as a child, but I gave it up for Lent. As any former Catholic will tell you, regardless of what religion we practice today, and today I consider myself a non-denominational Christian, those Catholic roots and traditions are hard to break. So anything about the devil or possession scares me more than I could possibly describe. I don't believe in the devil, but I do believe in nefarious forces. So does that mean there really is a devil, or are there really demons who can possess people? Fuck if I know. What I do know is this shit scares me to the point of terror. I still have not watched The Exorcist in its entirety. That fucking upside down, backwards crab walk Linda Blair does down the steps, that's it. When he's talking to Father Carrick and says, Demi, nope, I cannot get through it. I do watch the Exorcist TV series on Fox, which is amazing. Hello, Ben Daniels as Father Marcus, dear Lord. I'm having a moment, that man is on fire. Okay, back to the movie Devil. Devil was not filmed in Philadelphia. The flyover shots are Philly, and maybe a few exteriors, but that's it. It was filmed in Canada. Canada, people, are neighbors to the north with the haughty prime minister who doesn't embarrass his countrymen and women. Canada. The number of people when that movie came out who said, oh, I was in Philly when Devil was being filmed. The city isn't big enough to hold all the people who claim to be in Philly during filming. Then there's the people who claim it was filmed in the Comcast building and in the elevators in the Comcast building. If you've ever been inside the Comcast building, you know it looks nothing like the building in Devil, nor do the elevators in the Comcast tower at all resemble the elevators in Devil. Yes, the movie is set in Philly. That's just the story. That shit was filmed up north, so please stop saying you were on set during filming, and for the love of all that is holy, stop saying it was filmed at Comcast, because you sound like you have no idea what you're talking about. I think the other reason people claim Devil was shot in Philly is because it's based on a story by M. Night Shyamalan, and, as we said earlier, everything he does is in Philly, but not Devil. There is a film with a creepy demonic aspect to it that was filmed all over Philadelphia that also scares the crap out of me, but not quite as much as movies directly about demons. And I believe it's a better film than it gets accredited, and that's the 1998 film Fallen.
Monsieur, it's the brilliant detective who sealed my brutish fate. Remember this, Hobbs? What goes around really goes around.
You have a safe trip, yeah?
It's on my side.
Go ahead! Lead a good life! Criminals like Reese, they kill a few people somehow, it ain't their fault. But what took place tonight is the consequences of what I do.
You're home early today.
What change?
Detective John Hobbs wants to uncover the truth.
What does Azazel mean? Now, my dictionary says that evil spirit of the wilderness.
Walk away, Mr. Hobbs.
But nothing in this world
is on my side.
Can help him solve this case.
There are angels. Some of these angels were cast down, and a few of the fallen were punished by being deprived of form.
Come on, get out of here.
And each touch.
And at the execution, did he try and touch you? Or...
Yeah, he did, actually.
Passes the soul of a killer into someone new.
Well, I believe what I see, and I'm still trying to get my mind around what I just saw.
Some things, pal, you shouldn't know.
I know you, Hobbs. Put the gun down. I know who you are. Put the gun down!
Is on my side. Hey, pal.
My work is based upon evidence.
And aren't your facts resistant to normal interpretation?
Hey, Hobbs.
You leave my family alone.
But I'm still having fun.
Denzel Washington.
How do we fight him? Is it even possible?
I believe it is.
John Goodman.
Josie, you know I didn't do this.
I know that, Hobbs.
Donald Sutherland.
I know you know more than you're saying.
Haven't you done enough, huh?
Time is on my side.
Fallen begins with Denzel Washington, hello, hottie, as Philadelphia detective John Hobbs. Hobbs is visiting a guy named Edgar Reese. Reese is a serial killer and a death row inmate. It's the day of Reese's execution, and before Hobbs leaves his cell, Reese grabs his arm and speaks to him in Aramaic. Why do people in movies about possession always have to speak Aramaic? As Reese is put to death in the gas chamber, he sings, "Time is on my side." Why does he do this? Well, because he's possessed by a fallen angel named Azazel, who is able to possess the body of any human he chooses, and what Hobbs and his partner initially believe is a copycat serial killer, mimicking Reese's crimes, is really the spirit of Azazel in multiple bodies. Just like years before, when another Philadelphia cop committed suicide because he was accused of murders committed by Azazel, Detective Hobbs becomes a suspect in the copycat murders. Fallen goes all over Philly. Pat's Steaks, which is better than Gino's, South Philly, Torresdale, Holmesburg Prison, which I hadn't initially thought about including in the Twisted Prison series, but after rewatching Fallen this weekend and remembering some seriously disturbing tales coming out of Holmesburg, I'm going to include it sometime this month. Fallen even goes to the Jersey Pine Barrens, where you know there are a shitload of bodies buried. And the end, oh my God, the end of Fallen had me screaming the first time I saw it. I'd forgotten about the very last moments of the film until I watched it this weekend. And again, it had me screaming, son of a bitch, like Dean Winchester. Fallen is a movie about possession that I can stomach. It still scares me, and that's okay because I like to be scared. I like watching horror movies in what I call full movie effect. The room is dark, the lights are off, preferably at night, but I'll watch a horror movie at 5 a.m. too, and I often do. It's best if no one else is in the house, but at 5 a.m., no one else is awake, so it feels like I'm home alone. Isn't that the best way to be scared? The last film I want to share isn't actually horror, so I'll call it an honorable mention. It's a thriller, and it's one of my absolute favorite movies. Director Brian De Palma, born in Newark, New Jersey, and raised in Philadelphia, graduated from Friends Central School, where I know some listeners probably went to high school. Some of my friends' kids go there today. I am a huge fan of Brian De Palma. His early to mid-'80s films more than his other work, and of those films, my favorite is Blowout.
It began with a sound that no one was ever supposed to hear.
He's the one I saw?
Yes, he says he pulled a girl out of the car.
I would like you to forget about her.
Yeah, that's what I heard just before the tire blew out. You're right, it was a shot.
He recorded a murder. They say never happened.
There's still loose ends, witnesses. The girl, I've decided to terminate her. Terminate her. Terminate her.
Brian De Palma's Blowout. Now you hear it. Now you don't.
Blowout was filmed in Philly. It's about Philly, and there's a car chase with a young, hotter-than-hot John Travolta speeding through the courtyard of City Hall and crashing into the front window at Wanamaker's. And it's epic. In Blowout, John Travolta plays the role of Jack Terry. He's a sound technician, and one night he's capturing sounds for post-production on a film. While he's out at a park, he sees a car go off the road into the water. So Jack runs over, he jumps into the water, he finds the driver of the car is dead, but there's a young woman named Sally, played by an entirely underrated Nancy Allen, and she's trapped. So Travolta's character helps free her, and he accompanies her to the hospital where he finds out the driver who's dead was the governor, and he was planning on running for president. When Travolta plays back the sounds he captured in the park before the accident, he hears a gunshot just before the car went off the bridge. So the governor was murdered. And then the murderer goes after him and Sally. There's a scene in Blowout that is so chilling. It's Jack and Sally trying to set up the murderer, but he gets the jump on them and he kidnaps Nancy Allen's character, Sally. Jack, John Travolta, is racing through Philadelphia, and being an audio technician, he has Sally wired with a mic, and he can hear everything that happens to her in earphones, but he can't get to her. Blowout is just a perfect example of De Palma's earlier work. It's intense, it's dark, it's modern film noir set against the streets of Philadelphia, and it's wonderful. Plus, again, hotter than hotter, John Travolta. So, putting together this episode, thinking about horror movies filmed in Philly, got me thinking about all the movies filmed in Philly or about Philly, directors and writers from Philadelphia, and the Philadelphia Film Office that makes so much of the Philly movies possible. If a movie is ever made from the fictional novel of Twisted Philly, another one of my writing projects, which My Mouth to God's Ears will be done next year, it has to be filmed in Philly or I will not grant the rights to anyone. And I want Kevin Smith to direct it. Hear that, Kevin? I've got a treatment for you. As if Kevin Smith listens to Twisted Philly. It could happen. As always, thank you for listening. Ciao for now, Twisters.